How often do you think of Joshua?
Every day.
Is his memory what motivates what you're doing?
A lot of it.
Joshua Oukrop was 21 when he died 7 years ago of a heart attack. Robert Hauser is not a relative. He was Joshua's cardiologist.
Why is Joshua the case that's got you?
Well, first of all, he's young. It shouldn't have happened. It just shouldn't have happened.
The story of what happened to Joshua begins with the discovery as a teen that he'd inherited a heart condition from his father, Lee.
He came home from band and his saxophone was dented in a little bit in a few spots. He said, I just passed out and fell forward, so we knew something had to be done.
Josh's parents took him to see Dr. Hauser at Abbott Northwestern Hospital's Minneapolis Heart Institute. Hauser decided to implant a cardiac defibrillator called an ICD in Josh's chest.
When the heart becomes very chaotic, it shocks the heart back to normal.
Although Lee Oukrop and his older son Jacob both had similar heart conditions, neither had shown signs of disease, so only Joshua had an ICD implanted.
He was a kid, you know. He was a little reluctant to do it, but he knew it was for the best.
3 years of routine tests and checkups went by uneventfully. And then, in March 2005, Joshua Oukrop took a biking trip in Utah with his girlfriend.
His girlfriend saw him fall off his bike and collapse. CPR was attempted, but he could not be resuscitated.
He died.
He died.
I ended up talking to the county coroner. And he says, I got some news that I want to tell you. He said, Josh had an ICD implanted, and I said, yes, and he said it was faulty.
Instead of shocking Josh's heart back into rhythm, the device had shorted out. Josh's doctors asked Lee for permission to remove Josh's heart and examine it.
And I tell you, it was a very, very hard thing for me to do. I wanted my son whole, but I agreed to do it. And they brought it back to Minneapolis and they autopsied just the heart itself. And they found out that it was a very shockable heart. He could have been brought back to life had the device worked.
Had the device worked? Crushing words to Dr. Hauser, and intense motivation as well. How could the device have not worked?
I got into the FDA database, and my search uncovered a number of problems.
Dr. Hauser found the ICD's manufacturer, Guidant, had known the defibrillator was faulty since 2002.
We eventually met with Guidant in May of 2005. This would be 3 months after Joshua's death. And we told them that they were obligated to inform patients and physicians of the problem.
What did they say to you?
They declined to do so. They stated that they were afraid physicians would overreact and take these devices out unnecessarily because they believed that the likelihood of failure was very low.
So how many people were walking around with this faulty defibrillator?
Tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands?
Yes.
What did you do?
We went to the New York Times and we told our story. That defibrillator was recalled.
Guidant was taken over by Boston Scientific, which declined to comment, saying it was not interested in participating in our report. But that's not the end of the story. Dr. Hauser kept digging. He says he found problems at the FDA, the agency charged with approving and overseeing medical devices. He believes both the approval process and the follow-up once devices hit the market are badly flawed.
In this whole episode, where was the FDA the whole time?
I don't know. The FDA should have been on top of this because Guidant had filed a report with the FDA in August of 2004, laying out the details of the problem with this device.
The data we have from our review of recalls showed that FDA had approximately 26 reports of serious adverse events related to this type of device over a 3-year period before the device was recalled.
Marcia Cross is healthcare director at the Government Accountability Office, the federal government's watchdog agency. She's in charge of FDA medical product oversight and says she knows the FDA had the reports, but can't say if anyone read them.
When you say 3 years, 26 reports of adverse events,
Yes,
and still no recall,
yes,
and then this kid dies.
yes. It was, I think, the reports in the press of this patient that was the precipitating factor for the recall.
Well, forgive me, but is that what it takes?
It shouldn't be what it takes. That's the concern that we have about their use of the information that they receive. That is the kind of concern that we have.
Cross says the nonpartisan GAO put the FDA's oversight of medical products on its list of government areas at high risk for mismanagement and in need of broad reform. But, she says, the problems go back much further.
The responsibility for reviewing medical devices was first given to FDA in 1976. The expectation was that FDA was going to put out regulations for each type of medical device. And by 1990, FDA still had not put out regulations for these high-risk medical devices, over 100 different types.
In fact, according to Cross, 22 types of important and potentially life-saving medical devices, from automated external defibrillators to electroconvulsive therapy devices, remain without proper regulations.
And here we are 22 years later, and the appropriate regulations have not been developed?
That's correct.
Among these devices, metal-on-metal artificial hips, which have been the subject of a recent recall. Tiny metal shards can break off, releasing toxins into the bloodstream. It's believed that some 500,000 patients could be affected. The metal-on-metal hip was allowed to be grandfathered in on the approval of a similar device already on the market. This, says Dr. Hauser, is a faster and cheaper method to get a product approved, and it's a fundamental and not uncommon problem.
Companies are allowed to supplement a new device on a previous approval without conducting any human safety tests. For example, there was a defibrillator lead that functioned very well. The manufacturer decided that they wanted to make a smaller version of the lead, so they shrunk it up. They used the same materials, basically, same design, basically. Very quickly, it became the most popular lead ever. After 2 years of being on the market, it started to break. They may look the same from a material standpoint, from a design standpoint, but they perform vastly differently.
We asked to speak with the FDA directly about all of this. We made repeated requests for an on-camera interview. While the agency weighed its response, we spoke with some of its defenders.
The FDA, you can always try and do better, but I think the FDA basically does a very, very sound job.
David Nexon is a senior executive vice president at AdvaMed, a medical device trade group.
Some of the critics, I think want a zero-risk system where nothing is ever approved unless it's shown that they can never do anybody any harm. If you do that, you also have no medical progress, and that's not a good thing for the American people.
In fact, Nexon's group thinks the approval process is too slow.
The industry's concern about the FDA in the last few years is that while they haven't changed the standards for review, reviews have become much slower and more inconsistent.
But Dr. Hauser cautions that speeding up an already ineffective approval process could be dangerous because there's also inadequate follow-up after a device hits the market, something called post-market surveillance.
In the United States, there is no definite requirement for post-market surveillance for defibrillators and heart valves, artificial hearts, and so forth.
Wait, there's no requirement?
There's no absolute requirement. In other words, you wait for problems to be reported to you rather than actively seeking out problems. And there's a big difference.
Dr. Hauser says active reporting could have saved Joshua Oukrop. Remember, the GAO says the FDA received 26 reports during the 3 years before Oukrop's death.
I suspect nobody read the report.
Well, the FDA's got to know there's a problem here.
They do, and Congress knows they have a problem.
So when you say there can be tens of thousands of people walking around with faulty products, I mean, really, tens of thousands?
Yes.
It doesn't have to be, in your view.
No.
Last year, the Institutes of Medicine, an independent advisory group, issued a report stating that the FDA's current regulatory framework for most devices is so flawed it should be thrown out and replaced with a new system that, quote, provides a reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness. AdvaMed's Nexon says that even though in the last couple of years, recalls of device models with problems that could cause serious injury or death have doubled, in his view, the numbers are still small.
American people should be very confident that the FDA and the industry working together have an exemplary safety record. There are 50,000 different models of devices on the market right now. About 20 of those on average, they find serious problems with. That's less than 0.2%.
Why did I have to be the 1%? You know, not wishing it on anybody else, but why does there have to be any? There shouldn't be any. There can't be. When it's that critical of a piece, there can't be that kind of problems with it.
When we finally heard back from the FDA, the agency refused our request for an on-camera interview, providing us instead with a lengthy statement, which reads in part, "The FDA weighs the benefits and risks of every medical device we review. We must balance risk with the careful evaluation of patient benefit. This helps promote public health."
Today, Lee Oukrop worries for his other son, Jacob, who inherited the same heart condition as Joshua and has a defibrillator implanted inside him.
I mean, I feel confident that it will save me if and when I ever do need it. They have assured me that this device is a life-saving device, and I just put my trust in what the doctors say.
But this isn't Jake's original device. As the luck of the 1% would have it, a part on Jake's defibrillator was faulty. Remember those smaller leads Dr. Hauser described? Jake was among the 268,000 patients who received that shrunken-up version.
There was a recall on some of the leads that go from the defibrillator to the heart. The leads were cracking and shorting, and then the defibrillator couldn't deliver a charge if it needed to.
After having that device inside him for nearly 3 years, it was replaced before Jake was harmed. But 13 others died. Lee Oukrop says Jake just had better luck than Joshua, and that's not nearly good enough.
Somebody out there needs to be looking out for me, for us. We're not doctors, we're not scientists. Here it is 6, 7 years later, you still see that stuff is getting through. Stuff is being recalled. And it's all stuff that the FDA should be looking at, and they should be paying a little bit more closer attention to.